Joining me now is Jack Easterby. Jack, you've done so much that I actually want to let you introduce yourself. I'd love to hear from you, in your words, how you describe to people what you did and your past in the NFL.
Well, thank you for having me on. I've been so blessed by multiple different roles in an organization. I think we all, if you play sports growing up, you want to be a part of sports teams, And so when I got done playing college sports, I realized my talent wasn't going to take me anywhere to make some money doing it. And I needed to do something, vocationally with sports because I loved it so much. Grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, and I was fortunate to grow up in the shadow of the University of South Carolina, where quite frankly, during my childhood, the city of Columbia and athletics as a whole took a huge pivot when South Carolina joined the SEC because we started seeing, just unbelievably historic, basketball, football, and other programs come to town. And so it began to kind of put in me a bug to dream, to work in athletics. And so when I graduated from college, I went to Dave Odom, who was the basketball coach at the time, and he kind of made a job for me at the University of South Carolina, helping his guys with study hall and also mentoring and then running his camps in the summer. And so they called my first position learning specialist, and but it was just kind of make sure everybody showed up to class and help out. And then did that for 7-8 years, and then I was blessed by some relationships we had at South Carolina to get an opportunity to go to Kansas City and help their team. And there, Scott Pioli was a great mentor and helper for a couple of years, and then from there went to New England and was really, really fortunate with Coach Belichick hiring me to be a part of his football operation. Did a lot of different roles there, and we had some really cool things that we did. And then went to Houston and spent some good time there, helping reset that organization, and some really good things happened there too. Some tough things, but some good things too. And then now I'm back on the East Coast, hanging with my family. My parents both have Alzheimer's, unfortunately, and so we were blessed over the last 10 months to kind of spend the time with them and get them set up and kind of reconnect with the Southeast sports scene that we kind of grew up in. So it's been a great journey, lots of good lessons along the way. The boom of sports has been so good to our family. And I'm sure a lot of families around the country as sports has provided so many different opportunities and jobs and memories and all that. And our family fits right in there.
Yeah, I don't mean to steer the conversation to a random place, but I actually have been around someone with Alzheimer's. My grandma had it, and I empathize, man. I know that can be challenging, is maybe the word. And so I've been there to some degree. I empathize with that. I look at your past in the NFL, and I see so many roles, whether it's college football, basketball, NFL, whatever, team chaplain, director of team development. What I see is a guy who cares, who wants to help people and do well by people. How do you do that in the future? What's your plan, and how can you? I just sense a guy who wants to help people and cares. What's your hope in the future, and how do you plan to help athletes?
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. I think, like I said, when you grow up as a part of sports teams, right, and you love sports, I think you want team to function well, right? All teams function best when the people that are in the teams are healthy. And I think that whether it's different family structures or different upbringings or different challenges, I think that teams are complex, right? And so for me, I've always just had this really weird passion that's to help teams function better, help people function better in teams because sports are so fun. I mean, they can be life changing, really, if you think about it, whether just not just from a resource standpoint, but from a memory standpoint, right? When a team accomplishes more than they thought they could, it doesn't matter if it's a ninth grade girls basketball team or if it's a obviously a national champion football team. They mold together to start the season, start fresh, and obviously there's the world is their oyster until things happen, and then you have to solve problems in every level. And so I've always just had a passion for team sports. I think growing up, my dad actually ran our city basketball league, and so we had whatever it was, churches and community groups that formed teams, and we would compete against them. And then Dad organized it and ran the schedule. So I've always just had this cool, just affinity for sports teams and how they impact people and communities and how well they can teach you life's lessons if done the right way. And truthfully, if we're honest, like the world has really found out the amazing lesson teacher and uniter and just community establishment that sports can be, right? From the standpoint of just major sporting events and how they now control the calendar, or how they obviously impact communities, how they rally during tough times, even with what's going on in LA and what happened last night. I'm reminded of just sports has a huge influence. And so my heart has always been to find ways to use sports and influence people and hopefully leave them a little better than we found them. And sports just has a natural way of giving you good outlets to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I played football in college, played quarterback, and I try to be the quarterback every day in everything I do. And I learned so much about life and grew up as a human because of football, to be honest.
Mm.
You were around someone who, I mean, yeah, I said I play quarterback. Tom Brady was my biggest inspiration. Like I want to be just like him. And I think I still, weirdly enough, in my professional life, do things and try to emulate how he appeared to approach the game from afar. You've actually been around him. And so what'd you learn from your time with Tom? Well, you kind of rubbed shoulders with the guy who I think for many, many young athletes, at least in my generation, he was incredibly inspiring. What'd you learn from Tom?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we could do 10 podcasts on learning from Tom. I mean, I learned so many things personally, just not even attached to sports, right? He helped educate me on eating habits, and I've changed how I eat. I ate when we began to be friends in New England, and he educated me a lot on my body. And even after I was done as an athlete, just as a leader, as a businessman, just trying to be prepared for each day and understanding how much you eat affects your moods and your body, and being able to care for your family well and be healthy. But beyond that, I think it was just really, and I would say this about several other people, not just Tom, but I think really what separated him specifically was his intentionality, just how intentional he was on every aspect of what he did, how thoughtful it was, whether it was Christmas gifts for the whole team, or it was how he speaks to people in the hallway, or how he's thoughtful with the media and understanding his answers, and or even what time he gets to practice, what time he gets in the building, how he handles his off-season schedules. I just felt like he was very intentional. And I think that intentionality came from being well parented, from having good family structure, but also for his love for the game and his love for his teammates. And naturally, I think love produces intentionality. When you love something, you become a little bit more intentional with it, whether that's family or that's just a sport or maybe a hobby or something. And so he loves the game of football, and that naturally has driven a curiosity and an intentionality for him to find out how great he could be. And obviously, he separated himself as the best to ever do it. But I would say the intentionality, people they want to be great in what they're doing, but they aren't always intentional, and if you want to be great, doesn't matter if it's, again, Augusta National Golf Club, or it's, maybe somebody who's trying to be better in sports, or a team that's trying to, improve their performance. All of it, the improvement is going to be attached to the intentionality. And I think he embodied that every day, his intentionality on getting better and improving. And I really learned that from him, and hopefully aspire to do some of the similar things he's done, but probably not at the same level.
Yeah, I think the words attention to detail come to mind. Like just man, every little thing he did, and it's nice to hear from someone who's in the building that was really that way. I'm curious. I was under the impression you were the chaplain in New England, and I don't actually know your title. I've read director of team development, chaplain. In your own words, how would you summarize your role? You spent a lot of years in New England, won multiple Super Bowls there. What was that like, and what did you do there?
Yeah, I think the cool thing about my time in New England was, and this is true of anybody, whether it's an offensive quality control coach or a nutritionist or anything, Bill allows you to gain roles that you earn, right? So you have to produce in your role in order to gain more. And I think that what Bill created for me, which was really cool, was in every building, there's a need to onboard, equip, and inspire the people in the building, right? You have to onboard the new people, you have to equip them, give them the tools to be successful, and then inspire them to be the best version of themselves. And that was really my role for most of the time in New England. And as I got there, it was kind of, okay, stick to this one, couple of meetings a week. And then he expanded it throughout the time. And so that's why you had a couple of titles there that I kind of gained at the end when I was hiring staff and adding to the support staff and doing things that, he had asked me to do because I had shown myself to be competent in the original things that he had asked me to do. But yeah, I mean, Bill was so unique in his leadership style, having been, I think, raised in a military kind of cohort there in Annapolis. I think he was, he didn't love a ton of change. He wanted the same people to grow in their responsibilities. And if at all possible, when you prove it, you get more so that he can use the same trusted voices to continue to influence the culture. And so for me, while I came in kind of as one thing, I was able to grow and to gain trust and to produce good work, hopefully. And then, kind of oversee the entire team development portion. And when they talk about team development, I've had people ask me a lot about that title. And I really think that, we talk a lot about, developing a player from a nutrition standpoint or a physical standpoint, or potentially even looking at how, scheme is developed, right? Whether it's, more complex scheme or formations or, different plays that you can run. And few people realize how complex the organism is of the team, how everybody's roles differentiate every year, how roles evolve, how there's need for more services that support the team. And so my role really evolved into the oversight of anything that wasn't, specific scheme and personnel, right? So anything that was around the players and the staff that enabled them to do their jobs well. And again, like I said, on board, equipping and inspiring all the new staff and people that were brought in, because there's a certain amount of change and attrition every year, whether that's a staff member who's going on to a new responsibility, or that's obviously bringing in new players in the building. I really enjoyed it. I think I grew each year from that. I learned way more from the people up there. Devin McCourty, Matthew Slater, Nate Solder, Tom Brady, you name it, Julian Edelman, just tons of people that were just incredibly hard workers and sincere. And so, yeah, I learned a lot more from them than they ever learned from me. But I think, the role grew with time as I was afforded the opportunities.
Yeah, it seemed like, I mean, it's very clear the hallmark of those teams was the culture and the chemistry and the way everyone kind of came together, and a very unique group of people. I think what people from the outside, I've been around enough NFL teams to know, like, hey, it's a lot bigger than people realize. It's, a lot of people, their only experience in football is high school, maybe a little college. Most people don't realize how many people are in an NFL building, what's going on. How much were you working with players? Were you working with staffers? Were you a bit of both? Like, what were you guiding people? Like, you meet with people, are you helping with, because like these Patriots teams, like the players especially, seem like some of the most resilient groups of guys. Are you building their mindset? Are you, like, what exactly were you doing hand to hand and day to day with the guys?
Well, I think that there's different things you do according to the different seasons of the year, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about the in season portion of the schedule, that's one thing. But as players arrive, right, when you're talking about relocation of a player or relocation of a staff member, right, that's a big deal. When you're used to being in Columbus, Ohio or Auburn, Alabama, and you get drafted by the New England Patriots, there's a whole subset of life change that comes with that. And so I think allowing, like I said, that to be as smooth as possible and working with other great people in the building to meet with them about, hey, here's, different living situations, or here's different, situations that the organization is going to do for your family, or how those things go. So I think what we built was a curriculum that throughout the year, those needs were met with a certain subset of meetings that offset the potential blind spots for that group. So it just made sure that there was nothing in the way of progress for the team. So if we're talking about new players, then that's one thing. If we're talking about, captains and growing captains, and that's another set of meetings. If we're talking about getting ready to play the season and meeting with the ops staff about where we'll be, traveling and staying, and how we may spend a week away, for example, in Arizona because we have 2 games on the West Coast, and maybe going to a hospital while we're out there and spending some time with giving back. There's all different types of subsets of curriculum that go into the entire year to make the year flow well. And so I would say it really was more determined by where we were in the year than it was determined by one specific thing that I was doing.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that, right? Because if you think about it, when you're running a business or you're running a team, it's different for when you're getting ready to do a quarterly income call, it's a lot different, the pressures of that versus the, Christmas party or Christmas holiday party. It's a totally different, vibe at those different points of this, year or potentially reporting mechanism. So football has a unique calendar, just like every sport. And I feel like what Bill did a great job of, and then we try to do in Houston too, was establish a really cool baseline curriculum that meets the athletes and the coaches where they are, get them what they need to be the best version of themselves at each portion of that year, right? You can't treat April like it's December, but there are things that need to be done in April, right? And I think that we were blessed to really see that curriculum grow and of course evolve throughout my time there.
I have to ask you about Bill. I think it would be just a shame to not. And what I want to frame this question as is I think there's a lot of views of Bill Belichick. I think to me, you see his interactions with players over the years. There's a really caring guy in there. I think it's maybe hidden out by this rough exterior, but I do think there's some people that have an impression of Bill that he's cold and uncaring. And I'm curious how he fits in today's NFL. I mean, we do see Kevin O'Connell, Sean McVay, like these really young player friendly coaches. I don't know if that's Bill, and I'm curious in your words how you think Bill fits in today's NFL, and is there a bit of a misunderstanding of how he's perceived?
Yeah, I mean, I have learned that over the years that leadership is really about there's 2 hallmarks to leadership. One is to be able to establish and maintain trust, right? I think if you can't do that, it's tough to lead. But then I think the second hallmark to great leaders is that they're able to demand excellence out of the people they lead while providing the tools to them to do a good job. So if you can use the currency of trust and maintain the currency of trust, and then demand a lot out of people while giving them the tools to do their job, I think most everyone can perform, if they're capable in those environments. And I think what Bill is able to do is he builds trust through competency. He builds trust through planning. He builds trust through consistency. He builds trust with the environment. And then on top of that, his genius and superpower in a lot of ways is the ability to give people what they need in a defined role and then demand greatness out of them in that role. And, I think a lot of evaluation of people that don't know Bill is obviously an external personality evaluation. I think when we all know that leadership looks a lot different with each person, right? Whether it's the change of the president or the change of a leader of a country or a leader of a city or even, some of the Fortune 500 CEOs that roll over. I mean, leadership can look a lot different based on people's personality. I think your mention is very key. I mean, there's been people that I think have had, very, big deviations in leadership personality from one to another because they just want something different. And sometimes you've changed a personality that doesn't necessarily change the leadership, right? It's way bigger than just the person's personality. But Bill's authentic. He stays in who he knows to be, and I think his consistency really helps develop the trust of those he leads. And phenomenal human. Obviously, I think one of the greatest sports leaders for sure in our lifetime, maybe ever. And this is something too. I know you probably know this, but this is just something I was mastered or amazed by how he mastered the multiples of the sport of football. Right, football is a unique militaristic game of multiples. Right, huddling every play, different groups of people every play, obviously different game times, different obviously seasons of the year, different weather, different cities. It's just a lot of multiples, and so it really takes an academic prowess to be able to master that many multiples. And so, like I said, if you're demanding greatness out of people and establishing trust in that many multiples, right? I mean, you're just talking about a freak show academic capability in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, Bill was just phenomenal to work for and learned so much from him. Can't say enough about just all the different amazing lessons he taught me. And the greatness and challenge he demanded out of me, or the greatness and work he demanded out of me. I think I became better, hopefully, as a leader, as a person, and really enjoyed every minute.
Yeah, it seems like, again, I never worked with him. You did. It seems like he did a really good job making expectations very clear. Like he would tell you, here's what I need from you, and here's how to get there. Is that your experience working with Bill?
Yeah, I think he does a really good job with role creation, where he gives enough ambiguity, where there's not a stiff, rigorous, hey, you only do blank,
Yeah.
but there's a clear expectation of each person's role and how they'll function based on their gift set, and I think he does a good job creating that match.
I want to put this in a way that is helpful. I think so. You worked at Houston. Your time came to an end October 17th, 2022. It seemed like there were a lot that went on there. What did you learn from your time in Houston, and how do you reflect on your time you spent with the Houston Texans?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. Yeah, we could do a whole nother podcast
We
on
really
that
could.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would say that probably is the peak example of learning for me. Well, first of all, personally, I think I could have done a lot of things better. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I would say anytime you look at the mirror and you say, "Hey, we were leading this group of people. What could we have done?" There's a lot of personal things that hey, should have been a little more patient here. Should have learned, maybe a little bit more from that staff person, or should have listened to this expert who knew more about this than I did. There's a lot of that. But I would say more globally than that, I think each franchise in the National Football League and really in the NBA and Major League Sports, I'd say all of them, each franchise is at its own place of iteration, right? And I think that whether it's the Orlando Magic when they, popped their head up with Penny and Shaq and when they were new kid on the block, or the Arizona Diamondbacks when they got hot and won a World Series early in their early days. I think these younger franchises. So speaking of, really in the NFL side, it'd be the Panthers, Jaguars, and Texans, right? Who are kind of 95 to 2002. Obviously, each one is on their own journey to iterate and to create systems that will allow them to be who they're going to be. And I think it's hard in a league when you're comparing yourself to systems that the Pittsburgh Steelers have had in place since Chuck Noll, and what they're been, what the Indianapolis Colts are doing, or what Baltimore's doing, or what other organizations are doing, because you naturally are comparing a huge wide window of lessons that they have from institutional knowledge. And so I think Houston has done a phenomenal job in their early timeline here of getting good people in the building. The McNairs have done a great job of helping attract good quality talent to the football side and the business side, and solving problems quickly to catch up with those organizations that have been doing it longer, right? Because they're obviously the youngest franchise. So I would just say, I think one of the big lessons that I took away from it that was probably naive to, is that each organization is iterating at its own pace, and the problems that Green Bay, for example, needs to solve right now to get themselves deep in the NFC playoffs or to a Super Bowl is different than the problems that the Jacksonville Jaguars are trying to solve through whoever they hire to help coach your team next year, right? It's different. It's just different. And I think you got to be very specific with that organization's challenges and lean into understanding what probably will be the key to getting those fixed, and then fix them so that you're not there anymore, and that you can take on the next set that comes to that specific organization. Because as I've learned from different NBA and Major League Baseball front offices, and talked to people who have been in multiple teams and seen trends around the sports world, what I hear is how different each group is, right? And I was probably not only a little naive to that, but also was a little bit um, just lacked in some education of how specific things at each place can really be a holdup. And you need to get those fixed, right? You just need to, hey, these are things that are maybe between us and the best version of ourselves, um, and go from there. And really, like I said, just to be as plain as I can be with it. I mean, Houston, if you look at the other expansion franchises, they've been way ahead of these other franchises in what they've done to, grow, kind of reset a little bit, grow, reset a little bit, and iterate quickly. And credit goes to their family for hiring good people and being intentional at each phase.
Hmm. I'm curious if you could go back to the beginning of your time in Houston. What would you have done differently? Like, do you have any regrets? Anything you wish you could have changed or approached in a different way?
Well, I think when I first got there, I think I was a little. We won Super Bowl, that year, and beat the Rams, and there was a lot of really cool opportunities for me personally. And I spent some time, traveling around, interviewing, and with different franchises, and I think
In
when I
New
got,
England, won the Super Bowl and then left. Sorry, but
yeah, we won
yeah,
won the Super Bowl against the Rams. Really cool game in Atlanta. That was kind of the Brian Flores versus Sean McVay game where they were duking it out on scheme, and Todd Gurley and their offense had such a great year with a lot of those zone runs, and they had just had a phenomenal offense with Goff, actually Jared Goff, and just tons of really good deep shots. I think they had Brandon Cooks and maybe Robert Woods, and they had a good offense, and so. We transitioned from Boston to Houston, and when we got started, that relocation, I hadn't relocated in a long time, and so that relocation, I didn't focus on some of the things I should have internally, and there was a lot of change going on in the building at that time, independent of me. But I think I probably could have done some better things in that onboarding process to listen and learn more of what's going on there. Right after being at a place for a long time, when you go to a new place, you've got to kind of take in, like I said, their specific situation, what they're saying, what are they doing, because it's not the same. And so, when sometimes people say, "Hey, this is what our chief problem is," you have to listen to that, and there's tributaries that come off of that, and workflows that come off of that, and all the different complications of trying to work through things. And so, I think that onboarding process I probably could have handled a little bit better. Well, I know I could have. Um, and I think that would have led to some other things that could have probably helped me. But again, I think everything happens for a reason. I'm really thankful for each piece of that, even the mistakes, which again are plenty, um, because I think each place of it has led me to learning more about things I need to improve at as a leader, and I think have helped me. Definitely have lots of curiosity about elements of sport that potentially I didn't know about before we ran into some of those challenges. So really thankful for, quite frankly, the mistakes because they're great teachers.
no, I love that you said that. I've learned so much from my mistakes in my life, and I think it's honestly when you have a struggle, it's just an opportunity to get better. And I'm really curious. You, I've gotten criticism online, right? I've been a YouTuber, I've worked in this space for a long time, and I've dealt with a lot of online criticism. I don't think I've ever reached near the level you have, and I'm curious, man. How do you handle that? I know it's really tough. Like I know I take it personally when people criticize me online. It's really difficult. How do you handle that, man? Like you read headlines, you see your name. It's not. I know that because this happens to me. Not everything people say about you is true. It's hard. Like how do you handle those headlines and that kind of stuff?
Well, first of all, I would say, in sports, right? These cities love their teams, and so when you are blessed to have an opportunity to be a part of that team in any regard, whether it's the role that I had in Kansas City or New England or Carolina or now in Houston, they're going to be passionate about the production of that team, and so as you sign up for that and you receive the opportunity that comes with that, the blessings that come with that, right? The salary, the opportunity to be a part of that team, you also are signing up for the opportunity to be criticized, and I think that We would love to have one without the other, but unfortunately, they're together. And so, when you get an opportunity to lead and an opportunity to influence, you are also going to be in a position to be scrutinized. And so, those go together. They're one and the same. And you can't take the opportunity to lead without understanding the opportunity to be scrutinized and criticized. Some of that, because of the nature of the PR element of football specifically, is going to be unfair because you can't explain every trade. You can't explain every nuance to how you're maybe moving the staff around. You can't explain the workflow evolution. You can't explain, obviously, some of the new, challenges to team and how the dynamics within the team need to be maybe reconfigured or developed. And so, without being able to explain everything, you're going to be misunderstood some. I don't know if I'm a template for, honestly, Zach, of exactly what to do. I would say you got to have a good inner circle, right? Being able to talk to people and saying, hey, I'm kind of messed up right now. This is bothering me, because it does bother you, when you're criticized. And to be able to challenge with your inner circle and say, hey, what should I be thinking here? Just to remind yourself of truth and be grounded in what you believe about what's going on. I think you have to have good leaders around you that can tolerate some of that noise and say, well, we know, this has been exaggerated, or maybe, isn't 100% accurate. And in some ways that begins to fuel you, being misunderstood and people not understand. It's like, well, when they do see, how fun is it going to be that they understand we endured and we were able to take some water in the boat, but scoop it out the backside, and, so I think you got to have good people around you. You got to have good leaders with you in the mission. So that would be a couple of things. And then the other thing is, I would say, and this is something I've probably learned after transition away from Houston, is I think you have to listen to what is being said, it with a filter to what is maybe what they're trying to say and not what they're saying, right? So I think there's sometimes things that people say, uh, hey, we wish we could do this, or hey, this is wrong with our team, and they may be saying something underneath that um, they aren't articulating exactly through the criticism they're saying, but there's a message there to learn. And so you have to lean into that, because people say, well, I don't listen to any of it and I just kind of do whatever. I mean, I don't believe that. I think you have to be aware of your critics, and you have to be aware of the fact that they may think you are blind to something. And then you take that thing that they say you're blind to, and you let it be an informant to make sure you've got that covered. Or maybe what they're saying beneath the covers is, hey, this might be something you might want to think about. And so, yeah, I mean, we were criticized. And I think some of that has come true now. Like some of the, I would say, criticism now has come to light, right? That what we were dealing with, some things we couldn't talk about. But I also think there's things that I probably was justifiably criticized for, right? That we did that people didn't understand. They say, hey, this shouldn't be happening. And now completely understand that, there were some things that, hey, listen, this is not easily explainable. So yeah, I think it's a tough thing. I don't know if there's one good format to deal with criticism, but got to have good people around you. Got to believe truth, right? And you got to have some endurance to what you're doing, because, and I think one thing too that I've learned through a lot of missteps in my own life is, in the journey to do something new, there's going to be some misunderstanding because there's no precedent, right? When you're trying to do something totally new, right? Like there's no like, hey, remember in 1995 when we did this? Like there's none of that. So your virgin voyage is going to be the hardest voyage, because you can't reference a precedent that you can point to develop confidence. And with new things, I think that can be really hard. And so you, at that point, really, you've just got to create the precedent. And that's hard, but that's that's what it calls for.
I would think it's kind of hard to talk about Houston. I think I would have a hard time if I were you, because I think I would imagine kind of trying to thread a needle where there's a lot going on there, a lot of personalities, a lot of factors, and I'm sure there's a lot you can't say. And I don't want to get you in trouble, man. I don't want to ask you too difficult a question here, but I'm curious. Is there anything like how much is your time misunderstood in Houston? Like how were there just it seemed like to me there was a lot you were dealing with that couldn't be talked about and maybe still isn't not a good idea to talk about. But was there a lot that people just don't know about that situation that made your job much more difficult?
Well, I wouldn't say much more difficult. I would just say there was a lot of factors, right? There were a lot of factors, a lot of transition, right? A lot of things that went on that were really independent of me. It transitioned in a lot of different ways around the building. Um, but then there were things, like I said, that I could have done better in that transition. So I definitely don't, take it as some sort of this happened to me. I mean, I was there, I was making decisions. I made wrong ones. We made some right ones. So I think there was definitely, as I look back on all the different, meetings and kind of structures that we were trying to do, I do think we thought about a lot of the right things, right? I do think we did that. I think we thought about long term development. I think we thought about vision. I think the owner did a great job to think about the big rock, so to speak, getting the right things in the building so that we could, make good decisions going forward and not have to repeat any mistakes. I think there were lots of things that, really hard to explain that were nuanced and challenged to really get fully done publicly, but privately, I was really excited. A lot of the things, like I said, we were able to do to get things that probably wouldn't be looked at unless there was transition, right? Um, we were able to look at those things and go under some rocks and look at some things that were maybe okay. Let's see if we can develop this, and while we're here, let's go ahead and get it right, type of thing. Um, and I think one thing too with players and player transactions, when beloved players leave buildings, that's hard, right? It's just hard because people in towns, they grow up watching certain players. They got jerseys. They celebrate those guys. They know what they mean to the city. And anytime there's a potential shift in some of that, I think it really fractures some of the identity of the fan base and the identity of the whole group. So that was hard too, which was part of the reset, frankly. But
Yeah.
it's hard to explain.
Yeah, no, I'm curious, I think you had hope then a little bit. Like, hey, we're working on a couple things here and there. Was there anything you were working on that we don't know about that you were hoping, hey, this is going to happen and we're going to turn a corner as a franchise that you never got a chance to fulfill or finish?
It's a good question. I studied a lot of the resets that happen when I realized, okay, this is, there's a lot of transition and things going. We need to look at other organizations. And again, I give the leadership there a lot of credit. We studied a lot of the resets, right? Like what happened at different organizations that were trying to, really get it right, build the infrastructure, whether it was a team that had moved or a team that had reset to try to get a higher draft capital, or maybe there was some in other sports that had done certain things. Like again, everybody talks about the pick accumulation Sam Presti's done over in Oklahoma City, or sometimes with San Antonio, what they did to reset from the big three, and now to kind of begin to slowly rebuild around Wimby. I think we studied those types of things to look at the economics of those things, to look at the staff structures of those things, to look at maybe things that we needed. The NFLPA does a survey every year about how the operations work around every team. We use that as a lot of our informant to be able to understand, what different teams are doing and how well they are executing, and how the players feel appreciated and are taken care of. So yes, there were a lot of things that we were able to accomplish, I think, that were behind the scenes. And, like I said, I'm so thankful for each moment of each franchise I've been able to be a part of. But specifically there, I mean, was really, really thankful for a lot of the unseen pieces we were able to grow and, invest in while we were resetting.
I'm curious. You ended up as an interim general manager, which I don't think was a plan. I think it, and I understand, man. Someone asked for you to do something, you answer the call, and hey, a need is presented, you got to figure it out. I think some people, I'm sure I even criticized at the time, called you unqualified, and it's tough to like admit that and see in person and say that to your face, but I'll own that. I probably said that about you. How did that happen? How did that opportunity present itself, and what'd you learn from that whole experience?
Yeah, well, you said it perfect. I think in each, like I said, each situation of transition, I think you do what you have to do to get through that particular situation, right? I think there's sometimes where people have to take on roles, and like in New England, there was situations I know with we transition our equipment department, right, because of
Hmm.
certain things that happened. So we had people in there folding towels and doing
Yeah.
all types of things to make sure that the organization functions the right way. And like I said, I got to give the leadership a lot of credit because they were willing to take on some of those hard decisions. I mean, listen, great leaders make hard decisions. That's just what they do. And I think the leadership there in Houston made good decisions. They really did, to reset and to think about, okay, here's what we may do in the short term. And they were publicly stated, hey, this was just going to be an interim type thing. And I think that was good. And there wasn't, the back end of the year, obviously there's there's so much less player procurement, right, that happens. Really, you're just talking about getting the game day roster set and helping with the practice squad and making sure there's enough to play and practice with, and that the coaches have what they need around the building. So it's a totally different job description of that portion of the year. And so we functioned fine, and there's no trade or any sort of player. Huge player type of decisions at that time of year. So yeah, it functioned fine, and we transitioned into the next year. And again, was really thankful for support of ownership and support for the people around us. We had a good staff. A lot of those staff are still there that stepped up and did different things while we were, kind of, resetting and reestablishing the things we needed to do for the following year. So, yeah, it was a unique time, but yeah, looking back on it again, thankful for each part of it, because I think you learn different workflows, you learn different factors in your decisions, things that maybe hey, I didn't even know that was important, but it's real important, so that you can establish in the future, hopefully, more informed decision making.
Is it cool to see where Houston's at today? I imagine it's kind of like when you go through a breakup and you're like, you wish them well, even if you're not with them anymore. Is that an
Oh,
accurate description of how you feel?
that's right, absolutely. So many great people there, and pull for them and pull for the organization to do great. I think it's like that anywhere you work. You stay in touch with the organization. I remember when I worked in Jacksonville briefly out of school, I stayed, locked into that team, Fred Taylor and Byron Leftwich and David Garrard. There was good guys there that I was blessed to meet when I was a young, guy just right out of school. And you always stay in touch. I've loved the University of South Carolina. Didn't go there, but grew up there and worked there. And so I've stayed, Gamecock fan since I left. And, I've stayed a Patriot fan pulling for them. And then, obviously Houston and Kansas City, everywhere you go, I think you meet people, they change you. Hopefully you help them a little bit. And, you keep growing and keep pulling for them. I will tell you, as you transition from being a sports fan to being a sports executive, I will say, like, it becomes more about people, right? And how many great people that you meet along the way. I never saw myself being much of a Chapel Hill fan, right? But now with Bill being there, I'm excited to see what they can do. I'm excited to see if he can galvanize that team and grow the Chapel Hill loyalist and fan base there into something that's really fun, and maybe create a movement for college football. So it becomes more about people. But yeah, there's so many great people in Houston, so many great people everywhere I've been, that you still pull for after you leave.
I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I appreciate the time, and I'd like to ask a couple more things. I'm curious. You've had some faith-based roles. What role does faith play in your career? Like, how do you marry and how do you pair? Some of the stuff you've. I think you're a religious man. I'm not, but I'm curious how you. I see the value in it, and I'm curious how faith plays a role in all of this in your career and football and the roles you're looking towards in the future. How does faith play a role in that?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. My faith does mean a lot to me. I certainly understand. There's a lot of different circumstances within corporate environments that you have to make sure that you understand which environment you're in and that you're appropriate and you're respectful about how you go about those things. And I feel like I've tried to do that in every environment I've been in. I think when you're talking about organizations, specifically in sports, you're talking about people, and you're talking about people that you spend a lot of time with. And so, for me, I've always felt like faith and naturally the things that go on in life. I used to say this, and I'm sure you know this as a huge sports fan. Like when we start the season, so when the submarine goes under in training camp, and we come up for air in February, hopefully, like the things that happen in that period, right? Babies are being born. Unfortunately, people are passing away. You've got, people who have gotten married, all this stuff happens, right? Life happens when these teams are formulated. And so for me, my faith has always been a cornerstone to my personal life. But there's other people obviously that share that faith and go through life events and want support or encouragement. And I can see eye to eye with them on that, or maybe help them with something to encourage them in a certain way. That's always been a cornerstone of who I am, who my family raised me to be. And so faith is very important, not only from the value subset that it brings to me and how I try to operate, and that God is watching everything I do. So hopefully that holds me accountable to be honest and ethical and sincere in how I interact, but also I think hopefully to want good for others and want better for others and be there for others and empathize with them as life kind of happens during these sporting events. So sports is the rare kind of corporate, how should I say it, corporate life overlap, because you're just together so much. I mean, gosh, we were in these buildings 18 hours a day, and so naturally you've got so many things that come up. And you want to be able to be there for others and do life with them and help them as best you can. And for me, faith has always been a cornerstone to
Mm.
that.
It sounds like the foundation you've kind of built your whole perspective on, if that is an accurate way to put that.
Yeah, it's an informant, right? I think when you understand, that God is watching, you understand where you stand with Him. It does inform how you treat people. I think one thing you mentioned earlier that was, about mistakes. I think when you realize how many mistakes you make and that God sees them all, it definitely creates a different level of patience with others and empathy for others, because you realize, who am I to judge? I need to make sure that I'm in the boat rowing and that I'm learning with everybody and helping where I can.
What's next for you? Like, what are you hoping happens next in your career and in your life, and where do you want to go?
Well, one thing I would say, and I think we mentioned this in the open, but the last year has really been a surprising win for us that I'm not really sure I saw coming, frankly. We moved back to the East Coast. I'm living in Charlotte, North Carolina right now. And when I did, obviously the constituency growing up, Southeast sports is huge, right? Just meeting people, whether it's high school coaches or college coaches. The Southeast, in a lot of ways, has a good, solid family of sports figures and people who have influenced sports and are making a difference in sports in this region. So getting back connected with that network has been unbelievable for me. I mean, just people have said, "Hey, come to practice," or "Hey, do this," or "Hey, could come talk to my team," or maybe people that have just said, "Hey, I want to teach you something that maybe you didn't see when you were out in Houston or in New England." And I've learned a lot through that. And we've established kind of a family office. LLC. We're doing a small private equity fund, if you will. We're doing some debt servicing and small business debt, and buying some public equities with it too. But that's been a really cool part of watching sports business and understanding the business element to all of the different levels of sport around the world. And so I've been able to really grow in my business acumen, understanding of things. I've been able to grow get back in our Southeast kind of constituency, and then obviously, like I mentioned, take care of my family. And we've got them, my mom and dad, set up with great caregivers now and a great caregiving system that I think will bless them as they continue to fight the challenges of Alzheimer's. So I feel like this year has been incredibly encouraging. Um, and I think there's a lot of things that are codifying right now, like we mentioned, the transition of college sports and how many more positions I think will be added there within the business of college sports and how that will change in the coming years. And obviously, private sport business, private equity in sports, I think is, obviously on the rise, and the influence of how equity ownership and partial ownership will be handled. So, yeah, so I think all those things are on the table, and family and I are just trying to do the next right thing. And but this last year, honestly, has been a surprising, just incredible blessing, and I'm excited about 25 and seeing what comes next.
I just want to say I'm rooting for you, man. I really I love my family. It's everything to me, and I all I want to do is take care of my family, provide for them. And I get a sense that, man, like you're a really good dude who cares a lot about his family. I just get that. And I'm curious, man. Is there anything else people should know about you? Like, is there any? Again, I look at a guy who's had a really insane journey. Who, like, you couldn't take the Jack Easterby, a journey and make it a formula and do that again. I don't think. Like, I just don't think I could be like, hey, do what Jack did. I don't think that is a replicable formula. But because of that journey, is there things people misunderstand about you, or maybe you want to set the record straight on?
Well, I don't know about the record, but I think each person does have a unique journey. I think you said it well right there, right? I think that when you're from Columbia, South Carolina, and your dream is to be a part of college athletics or athletics as a whole, I think one of the things you do is you start where your feet are, right? You start with whatever you can do at a university like South Carolina to serve. And for me, that was study hall, it was Bible studies, it was character development, it was speaking to teams to help athletes that were trying to get the life skill portion of their career started, right, and transition into college. And so I think one of the things that is very complex, and I'm sure you understand this, but I would say about really any journey, but specifically to mine, that I think I've been asked a lot in these types of interviews, is you don't get to choose, right, where your value is in relationship to each team you enter, right? Like, I'm sure there's guys that entered, let's say, maybe 10 years ago as great video guys that understood how to record and log and organize practice. And now here comes this whole new technology with data and analytics that when you record practice, it's not only recording the players and the pictures, it's recording the GPSs and the movement of players and all this stuff. So I think there's a reimagination of that workflow that happens. And the person that can pivot with that to reinvent themselves, if you will do that. And so we have in sports in our history in the last, well, for sure in my lifetime, I'm sure in yours, we have been through 4 or 5 major reconfigurations of all of the workflows in sports, right? I mean, if you think about it, from the boom of sports business and really establishing a lot of the opportunities for people to make really good money in sports, whether that's late 90s, early 2000s, right, to obviously a social revolution, a cultural challenge, a pandemic, multiple challenging, presidencies. And then now private equity in sports, college sports being, or athletes being paid. I mean, all of these workflows have been reconfigured. And so I would just say, like, as much as we all think we may be experts at one part of it, I think your goal is to show up within the team and provide value. And that may have to pivot. And for me personally, it pivoted within each place I went, right? At South Carolina, it started certain things. And then over time, it says, hey, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you help us with this? And so your goal is to be valuable to the team, right?
Yeah.
And Bill was really a blessing in that way, because he knew that he could use me to do different things as I grew, and his trust and other people's trust along the way. And so I don't think it's um, maybe it is misunderstood, but I don't think it's a bad thing to be pliable within the team context so that you can provide value across the board. I don't think that's a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
If you're a scout and you are really good at breaking down nickel corners, and that's something you can see and you understand how, the best blitzers from the nickel position, then that's great. But you also want to be able to help, set up pro day, and you also want to be able to help set up practice, and you also want to be able to say no college coaching trees and where good players are going to come from. So I think the diversity of thought in sports has really expanded, and the diversity of workflow has really expanded. And so for me, I think that's something I have just tried to acquiesce to and learn. And I don't think it is unique to your point. I've done some different jobs, but I think sports has also grown and changed a lot. And so people that are willing to grow in it, they're going to thrive as this continues to grow and evolve.
Yeah, I appreciate you a lot as a problem solver, honestly, and someone who is very malleable. And I think maybe this is the last thing we'll end on here is, what do you say to future employers or future business partners? What value do you bring to the table, and what are you? How do you make yourself valuable to future people you work with?
Well, I think we all, to your point, we all want to provide value that's independent of that situation, right? So when you enter, a new franchise or a new business, you want to be able to say, "Hey, independently of what you guys have going, I've done this." And I would say one of the coolest things about going through, really, let's say New England and Houston, was we were blessed with some really unique challenges that were confidential, and in a lot of ways had to be solved by a small group of people in an office, and had to be handled in a way with a certain level of professionalism that really had to be kind of unique. And I would say that to say, like, I think that's something that when you go into a problem and you're looking at an organization that's trying to solve something, you don't ever know how it's going to finish. You really don't. Like, you can say, "Hey, we're going to trade for this guy, and we're going to hire this coach, or we're going to all we have to do is blank." But the reality is that's not all you have to do. It's going to be complex, and it's going to come down to, several people in an office saying, "Okay, how do we get this complex problem into simple steps to try to get ourselves from where we are to where we want to be?" And so I would say in New England and Houston, for sure, I was really fortunate to see some really complex things, right? Whether it was unfortunately a scandal type situation, or it was a situation where we just had some things that unfortunately were dealt to us.
Yeah.
Um, and we came out of both of those with really good situations for the organization. We were able to navigate them, keep them confidential, communicate directly with ownership, be sincere. And then on the backside, I think they're both better for what we were able to do. And so I don't think it's one, "Hey, I do this." I think it's more of, if you want to lean in to complex problem solving and authentic leadership, then I think I've been blessed to be a part of those circles, and I'm very fortunate for that. Because quite frankly, you go back and look at some of the greatest leaders in not just sport but in the world. Really, what they were complex problem solvers, right? Like, how do you make the complex problem of a voting system, or a complex problem of an economic system, complex problem of geographical bias or whatever, into a more simple, bite-size, slow curriculum that can solve it? Well, it's hard. It's hard. And, again, I think I was fortunate to do that, be a part of that, for sure, in the last two places we worked. Um, and it'll be interesting to see, because that's really the conversations I've had about my next work, has been, people who've got some challenges and problems and say, "Hey, we were looking to do this. What do you think?" And those have been energizing to hear about.
Man, I'm curious where you land, and I'm really rooting for you as a person, and I appreciate your time very, very much.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate your time, and thankful for the thoughtful questions and the fun banner.
Thanks, Jack.